All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a sort of a special edition of Art Brunch. We have another guest speaker. Today is Mike Hamers. I first got to know Mike Hamers as a curator, not, my being a curator, but also Mike Hamers being a curator. When we first opened up the art gallery here at Pine Street Church, Mike Hamers played a real pivotal role in helping us launch. He basically curated the very first exhibit we had here. It was called Artists in Recovery, AIR, A-I-R, and it was a really exciting time for us here. But then I very quickly got to learn that Mike is a fantastic, not only photographer, but he's a fantastic artist as well. And so he wears a lot of hats. He's been actively involved in the art scene in Boulder for several years, particularly in supporting the arts and putting on exhibits, really some significant pivotal exhibits in the history of Boulder. So he wears a lot of hats. He's multi-talented. We're very excited to have him here as a guest presenter. I will say this is going to be like a introduction to photography 101. So if you're someone who doesn't know very much about the basics of photography and how to take a good shot, how to recognize a good picture, well, you're in for a treat this morning. So I hope you have pencil and paper handy, because Mike is going to also help us learn pretty much the basics on how to take an artistic photograph. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike, it's all you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Waverly. So as many of you know, I've been a graphic designer and illustrator for about 40 years. And so I've been applying the rules of composition and design for like every day of my entire career. But it wasn't until about 8 years ago that I got interested in fine art photography and also my fine art artwork. It came as a result of from 2009 to 2012, I went through 3 years of depression, and getting re-engaged in the arts were a fantastic rebirthing of just getting a whole new perspective on life, and what better way to do it through art and photography and poetry. And in a lot of our lectures, we have already talked about, we've kind of nipped at the edges of what is composition. A couple times we talked about leading lines, like a road or a river, you're going off into the horizon. Anyhow, I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes introducing the idea, some definitions of composition. And I'm sorry, I'm having navigation issues here. Why isn't this? I must have to do it a different way. Sorry. Okay, so what is composition and why does it matter? So let's read this together. Composition is the placement or arrangement of visual elements in a work of art as distinct from the subject of the work. It's how the subject is arranged within the frame of the photograph or artwork, not what the subject matter is. And artists and photographers commonly employ 10 compositional techniques. We've talked about some of these: framing, like using a bridge or some branches over the top of an image as a framing device, leading lines, symmetry, negative space, filling the frame, contrast, repetition and patterns, depth of field, shadows, and combinations of techniques.
Hey, Mike, real quick, could you speak about what negative space is? I think a lot of people are not familiar with that term.
Okay, I'll find a place to incorporate it.
Okay.
And there's a couple other extremely common techniques that are used by photographers and artists. One is called the rule of thirds. And a lot of these techniques are as old as the ancient Greeks, like Euclid. The rule of thirds has these focal points where there's two different ways to apply them, either to get your subject matter to align with one of the four dots, or for something like the horizon to line up with one of these leading lines. Another really common one is the golden ratio, and it's based on a mathematical formula of a harmonic growth. You can see our friend here in this shot here. This shot was in the slides on last week. But the golden ratio appears everywhere in nature, in the way the seashell grows, the way the seeds are growing out of a sunflower. There's thousands of examples of where the golden ratio appears in nature. And it's easier to understand it if you see it visually. This is the golden ratio. Michelangelo uses this a great deal. This is a more simplified version of taking the information from the curves and getting into blocks. And this is another way of displaying these optimal ways of dividing visual space to make a more pleasing composition.
Yeah. Mike, real quick, let me say something about the golden ratio. Because it appears naturally in nature and it's everywhere, a lot of people infuse it with a lot of spiritual fecundity. People like Pythagoras thought it was, almost like an equation for divinity or divine spirit or something, because of its ubiquity in the natural world and in the creative order. So it's been imbued over history with a lot of spiritual power and significance as well. And one thing, though, that I think gives credence to that is when we look at an art object that is according to that ratio, we do experience something significant. We can't put a name on it, we can't articulate it, but just we realize when we see it, something significant. We're looking at something significant. It's a pleasing experience. It's an aesthetically rich experience. And we may not know why, but often it's because of that ratio being apparent. All right, thanks, Mike.
Yes, absolutely. And here are some other extremely common ways that the Renaissance and classical artists have divided up space to find very pleasing proportions. This is like the rule of thirds on steroids. Degas very commonly used what is called the golden triangle. Here's an example of Van Gogh using perspective. Here's the beheading. I forget the name of this artist, but the composition is based on this triangle, the relationship of the three faces. An S curve is used a lot here. It's in a portrait, but we oftentimes see it in roads and rivers going off into the horizon. A dynamic symmetry is an extremely popular one. You recognize a lot of these photos from last week's video. Henry used dynamic symmetry, and he just inherently had this information in his brain and could see these things. You're not taking time to figure out, oh, what's this angle and what that angle. It just comes naturally to you. It's something just kind of that gets embedded in your brain, the way you see space and proportions. And so here's a first of one of my photographs. Is called Biting Time. But this was anything but biting time. This photograph lasted for about 7 seconds. I had gotten down to the Denver Convention Center accidentally an hour early before they opened. I was delivering printing. And I was just killing time, walking down the street with my camera and my iPhone, looking at graffiti and windows. And all of a sudden I came across this beautiful, spectacular Crayola yellow wall. And it marks the entrance to a parking lot to be used for the convention center. And I was thinking, wow, this is so cool, but it really needs a human element to give it scale. Otherwise, who would even know what it is? And as I was thinking that, I was walking, I was here on the extreme left, and I saw out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, and I realized it was a person. So I dashed around into the street. I had to run around a bus stop and a paper box. And I just quickly raised my camera, and this is what I actually captured. So obviously this requires a little bit of post-production in Photoshop to straighten up the vertical and horizontal lines and give it a better crop. And in a heartbeat, I snapped 2 pictures, and just as quick as he appeared, he left. Somebody called his name and he got up and left. But what an unusual character to show up in Denver in the year 2017 or whatever, with this Boulder hat and in a suit. But I just love the use of composition. This could be classified as empty space. Here is the subject matter with a pseudo second subject matter. Actually, there's 2 focal points. The whole yellow wall was the original focal point. It's eternal. It'll be there for 100 years. The man was there for 7 seconds, but he is the focal point. And even he has a focal point, which is his phone. And so I wanted to, for the sake of this presentation, I just wanted to see how my photos ranked with some of these old master rules and guidelines and stuff. And I found, wow, amazingly, the golden ratio fit on here extremely well, of the ratio of the width to height, and having one of my main characters centered on one of the important lines. And then just for the heck of it, last night I wanted to check it with the one that Degas uses a lot. He uses the golden triangle, which goes from the a line from opposite corners, and then a perpendicular line to the other corner. And not only is my subject matter on this mean line, but also my the focal point of his focal point, which is the phone, is right on the line. So it's like, yeah, my sense of proportion was perfectly right on. Here's the next one. I call this the March of Time. And again, I love this use of space. I love the linear quality, how the structure of the building and the shadows kind of flow and become equals. The empty space inside and outside, becomes, almost like a non-wall. I purposely, this is how I saw it. I saw the people, extremely cut off. And for me, this became kind of symbolic. This reminded me of when I was in depression. You're kind of like in a self-imposed prison of isolation, and you're aware that there are people in your life, but you're really not interested in them. You're so self-absorbed. And even these people are kind of each in their own compartment. They're not, and their shadow side is more prevalent than even their personalities. You can't even see who they are. And oftentimes on Facebook, I'll pair quotes with my photos. And I like this quote: "All art is the result of one's having been in danger, of having gone through an experience all the way to the end, to where no one can go any further." I thought that was a very nice quote. Okay, let's have a little bit of fun. I was at the recycling center and I saw this beautiful stack of boxes, which reminded me of a face. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of Giorgio de Chirico, the surrealist. And as a refresher, this is what his artwork looks like. It's very devoid of human life. Sometimes have one little person. Here's a train. If he does have people in it, they're oftentimes not real. They're mannequins or masks. And even these eyes have the same arches that De Chirico oftentimes uses on his architectural elements. So I just saw an affinity there between those two. And here is another pure composition. It's not even about the subject matter. I know this is junk, but this could easily be a photograph out of Architectural Digest of a bedroom scene with the headboard and the art above, of the placed pillow, maybe a magazine, and but just the strong dynamic of the geometry, the interesting contrast of textures, the minimal use of color. It just appeals to me personally. Here's another common framing device of actually literally using a frame or a window. And in here, not only looking inside the house, we get to peek back through to the other side. And it's almost like time travel. So I called it Back in Time. I love this shot. I was traveling up Highway 52, about 60 miles an hour, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw these two chairs in front of this metal barn that I had gone by hundreds of times before, but never seen the chairs before. And I loved the idea that these are surrogates for the people, for the friendship. I love this long, ominous shadow that is cast, the angles, the contrasting textures. And I paired it with this quote, 1 chair for solitude, 2 for friendship, 3 for society. I wasn't interested in society. I was still not watching local or national news. I didn't care about politics, but I was interested in friendships. I was interested in the one-to-one, and I thought that this conveyed that message very nicely. This was a beautiful shot taken on 63rd Street early in the morning. Again, I love the composition. You can see the power of thirds. I mean, I'm off to the left. So there's like 1/3 space is negative space here and 2/3 of the tree. And again, my horizon line is like 1/3 up from the bottom. And, but just the mood, the lighting, the minimal reflections, I just find this to be a very handsome picture. Oh yeah, and the quote, "It was the possibility of darkness that made the day seem so bright." And who gets tired of seeing pictures of the Flatirons or the Maroon Bells? This is one of my classic photographs of Colorado. Yes, I have the trees in there and I have the shoreline, a little bit of reflection, but I loved the quiet solitude, spiritual quality that this has of the sky reflected in the water. I'll show you another one. This one looks more painterly, almost looks like wet paint. It's this breeze just touching the surface of the water. But how can you not think of like a Mark Rothko when you look at a real simple photograph like this? It just has that basic elemental, like the field paintings. I love the dynamic quality. Snow just changes the world. It adds a coating. It changes the surface of things. But in this case, it actually kind of adds a time element. These tire treads were fresher than the ones down here, and all the different angles. The curved ones, the angled ones. It's just like a beautiful abstract painting that I didn't have to paint, but I did choose it. And here's another one. I just love photographing snow arcs. And you guys recognize this. This is about 2 blocks from the Pine Street Church. It's over there by the Catholic Church. Just love the shadows, the play of different, the uniform red lines, steps going up, and then the zigzag boogie woogie, shadows, going up the walkway. And here I'm just at Barnes and Noble. It's the low winter sun. I think it was like a November, December, and I just love the unusual shadows that were cast. I purposely wanted to leave a little bit of the chair in. I didn't want to take it all the way to grayscale, black and white. I like the real minimal use of color and just exploring all these various shapes, and I like the mood that it has. Here I was taking a little tour of an old dairy farm that obviously wasn't being used anymore. And it was so dark inside, it wasn't much to photograph. But as I was leaving, I saw this beautiful composition hanging from the ceiling, this beautiful chain and this wire. It was so specific. I'm sure at one point in life, this had a function. This held some type of bottle or a light or something. but now it was relegated to being fine art, to being a sculpture. This was a demolition site. This was hanging off a fence. I don't even know what it is. It's like metallicized paper, but I just love the composition. I love all the textures, the contrast of the warm colors and the blues. And I love this quote, "Life is the balance of holding on and letting go." And here's another one from that same shoot. Again, absolutely adore these textures. I love the composition. I love the movement. Again, this is just kind of play of positive space and negative space. It's almost pure abstraction. I love this one. This is my abstract nude. It's really just glue residue from a no parking sign that's fallen down. It's glue and some dirt, and it's very strongly reminded me of Picasso's Reclining Nude. They have some strong similarities. Waverly owns this one. I love, this is the kind of playfulness I like to incorporate into my photography when I can. The creation of Adam, and of course, what I'm alluding to is Michelangelo's painting of the creation of Adam, and I just saw that. I see these shots when I take them. They're not by accident. I oftentimes have the titles. I see what I see right away, and I usually try and shoot full frame. I don't try and do a lot of post-production, although in that first one that required one because I could barely get my hand up to my face quick enough to take the picture. And you never know what you're going to find. I was just exploring some weird paint chips and rust, and I saw this face of this woman. Here's her lips and her nose, her eyes, and this much more gargantuan type ogre character with the eyes and the mouth and the ears. So I called this Beauty and the Beast. It's kind of a macro or pseudo macro image. And for me, this is a beautiful, pure composition. It doesn't even really matter what it is. And what it is, it's a huge piece of road making equipment. It's one of those giant cylinders that flattens the road to make sure the ground is level. But while I was exploring it, I just fell in love with the yellow color, the texture, the blending into this rust color. And I could see these mathematics. Kay suggested that I use this one to talk about some of the things, laying the grid of thirds on here, which is interesting, the way different things perfectly line up. But what I see even further are the dynamics of some of the curves, or the angled lines. If you follow this angle up, it does hit one of the optimal points of the thirds grid, but it also does hit the exact center line, and the exact center line exactly lines up with that bolt. And if we follow this line up, it follows tracks to the top point of that grid. Anyhow, I see all these relationships, and that's why I found the composition beautiful in the first place, and that's why I took it. Again, the beauty of snow to transform the world. I just love the absolute simple quality of this, the simple palette, the contrast of the geometric trees and all this detail. But then we have this ribbed patterning across the barn. A little mimic, the little wreath mimicking the roundness of the tree, and this little roof mimicking the bigger roof. There's actually, for as simple of a photo as it is, there's actually a lot going on. Here I was exploring a barn on 75th Street in Louisville, and on the back side, the barn was reinforced with this very warm colored concrete with these piers, these pillars across the back, and this one particular one had these wire ropes. I just love the colors, the textures, the shadows, the very warm palette. And again, why did I place the pillar right there just naturally? Well, if you remember this one from like slide number 4, it's one of those golden ratios of finding optimal placement. It wouldn't be the same if I just dropped it right in the very center. It is more interesting being off to the side like that. Here we were having breakfast at the Morning Glory Cafe, and I was always in love with the umbrellas, so I just started studying them. I had my iPhone pointing upward, and I finally found a place where all 3 textures overlapped. Again, I just love the flow, the beautiful palette. Just an interesting visual experience. And this one I purposely did want to center, Orange Belted Bumblebee. This appears on the cover of my Walking with Rumi book. He was originally over here in the 3 o'clock position, and I watched him for a long time walking up, and he finally settled down for about a 15-minute nap. So I was able to get really close to him without me bothering him. Now this one I used my iPhone, and I shot this inside Whole Foods before they did the remodel. They had different lights on the ceiling, and it oftentimes gave you these really harsh lights, shadows. But this kind of reminded me of Van Gogh's sunflowers, the weeping sunflowers, where their heads are down, and thinking about how tragic Van Gogh's life was. And so that was how I came up with the title, just thinking about the relationship of sunflowers and Van Gogh. This one I took right across the street from the Pine Street Church. One October, I'd been downtown for a meeting, and there had been a cold snap that night. And as the sun was coming up around 9 o'clock, it was just raining purple, gold, and red leaves. And I was just like a kid with my iPhone, just walking around this person's front yard, just photographing all these different compositions as they were being created. And then the wind would come and blow them and change it to something else. It was really kind of a magical little 20 minutes there when I was in that photo shoot. Here I shot this one again with my iPhone. I was inside King Soopers. We were buying vegetables, and I happened to look at this head of romaine lettuce, and I just saw how beautiful it was, the lighting, the water. It reminded me more of a celestial shot, like something the Hubble telescope would take, of some type of expanding white dwarf or something. I don't know. This is an aspen tree, and I saw this face here, and it, does it not remind you of a Modigliani portrait? Our brains are kind of set up for facial recognition. I see faces and all kinds of things. I have dozens and dozens of cool shots like this. And sometimes I will do straight photography, not just this weird stuff. I would like to do more portraiture. This happens to be my grandniece, Anaya, when she's about 4. I shot this unknowingly. Well, I knew it, they didn't. These 2 men inside a Panera Bread. And a funny story, I was showing this at the First Congregation Church. The theme for this group show was places in Boulder, Colorado. And about 10 minutes into the opening, the man on the left here recognized himself talking to his best friend, who was going to have a 90th birthday soon. So he bought the photograph to be able to give it to his friend. So I printed and matted another copy and gave it to him so that, for free, so they could both have a copy. Oh yeah, and I like to play a couple of mugs. Am I talking about the guys or the men? It's kind of both. Here's another street photographs. I'm actually inside a Monte coffee shop. I love seeing, first there's the 2 people in the first focal plane. And just beyond that, outside the building, there are the cars. But behind that are actually the inside of the building that's behind me. I'm right here. And it's merging on the same level as the businesses across the street, the cafe and a dry cleaner and a photo studio, which is almost like a billboard in front of the Flatiron. So I just love the compression of like 5 layers of space into this, you know, kind of a geometric presentation. Here I was just getting up to make coffee one winter morning, and I happened to look in, and I saw this beautiful relationship of the cups. They kind of remind me of ears. They also remind me of figure 8. Again, this one is not pure black and white. I left, there's a little bit of green in here. I love black and white photography, but oftentimes I like just leaving that little hint of color. It adds a little bit of depth or something. Here's another shot I took with my iPhone. I would frequently visit this horse on Lookout Road, and she was apparently well groomed, well taken care of. Her mane was often braided, probably by some little girl, but I just love the flowing lines. I love that the horse, the eye almost looks human, and she's still looking at me. She never takes her eye off me because she doesn't completely trust me. But I like how I got a little bit of the corral here, so you can tell it's not a wild horse. She's, you know, in a fenced area. Just the textures, the lines, the curves, the use of space. This is what turns me on. And here's a couple more standard nature shots. This was with an iPhone. As I was getting out of the car at Parkway Cafe, with my iPhone, but I just loved all the beautiful detail. I mean, this thing almost looks like prehistoric. Again, I like the detail and the angles here. You can tell I shoot everywhere. I shoot in grocery stores, laundromats, parking lots, bathrooms. That's one nice thing about photography. You can take it with you everywhere, as opposed to my art. I pretty much do it on my computer or my desk. Again, here's a nice, lovely composition, a little bit more dynamic. I like the relationship between the 2 flowers. It almost looks like they're dancing. Sorry, looking at something here. I was just reading the chat. This was a house that was being remodeled, and the drywallers had come and they were doing their spackling, you know, hitting the nails and stuff, you know, getting ready to put primer down. But I thought it was unusual, the negative spaces where they didn't apply paint or, you know, primer or mud, reminded me of windows. It reminded me of the moon through my window. It had a very poetic charm to it. And then here's another one from that same house. And it reminded me a lot of Henry Matisse, the same type of simplicity, the use of space. I took this at the Denver Botanical Center. It happened to be during the Chihuly exhibit. I've got really cool photographs of the Chihuly glass as well. But for some reason, I like this particular shot of this footprint in this sea of texture of little pebbles. Again, this is one case where I'm using texture actually as a framing device. And so this is kind of what, when you're talking about negative space. So the shoe itself is, in some ways, here is the positive space, and all the texture, all the pebbles around are the negative space that are providing the rest of the frame. I can try and point out negative space and some more yet. Again, I have a little series of very surrealistic images. This is actually just the anti-skid texture in the inside of a Ford truck with rust that I called Homage to Ray Doan. And it reminded me so much of his early etchings. You remember, if you've had any art history, you've seen this before. The eye, like a strange balloon, mounts towards infinity. Here, paranoia. Again, I was just walking down the street and there was this plastic sheets that they use to kind of protect trees or to guide pedestrians away from construction areas, but I saw all these little faces looking at me, and so I just had to capture that. And here is my here is my nativity scene, Madonna and child with angel. And I wanted to put this shot in there by comparison. I was in a public bathroom, and I was looking down at the textured floor, and all of a sudden I realized I was looking at this nativity scene. And I could use that as a Christmas card some year. And then I just wanted to show three slides of my artwork, so you can see how my artwork is influenced by my photographs and the photograph of others. I don't work from my head. This is a colored pencil drawing. These are both airbrush watercolor. This one, her hair is done with colored pencil. I do have photographic references. Sometimes I'm looking at 2 or 3 photos at the same time. They're not done in Photoshop. They're done with paint and marker and colored pencil on watercolor paper. Here's the latest one I did. Again, I'm learning how to do these textures and burnishing them in, and then working over the top of them to get more depth. And so, and this last one called Linear Thinking, Cowboy Poetry. I love the relationship, the way the space is divided between the red and the blue panels, the linear quality of the rope, the contrary, these angled stripes kind of mimic both the rope and the colors in the truck, but it's nice that they're rotated to a new dynamic. I think with that, I'll just open it up to questions or comments.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you very much, Mike. This has been a wonderful presentation, and I've learned a lot. And I hope other participants have learned a lot about photography and just how to make a composition, how to recognize an artistic, potential artistic image when you're just walking around. And that brings me to my very first question. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to put up your contact information for anybody who wants to contact you regarding some of these images. They might want to purchase them, give them as a gift. But before that, I have a question that I hope will kind of open us up here. And that is, many of these images that you have shown are things that we walk by and don't even notice, like the stairwell, like the side of a barn, like the inside of the Ford. You know, we see those things, but most of us, if I'll speak for myself, I guess, I don't always see the potential for an artistic image there. And you do. Is that something that all of us can train our eye to see, or is that something that has to come naturally? And real quick before you answer, if anybody doesn't want to voice a question but wants to put a question in the chat, I'll look at the chat too and ask some of those questions on your behalf if you'd like. All right, Mike, go ahead.
Well, it is something that you can learn. You do it with practice. I haven't always been as, I'm going to call it, a sensitive to seeing photographic images everywhere I go. But something happened to me about 8 years ago. I got totally turned on. It began with going to the Chihuly exhibit and taking a lot of photographs that day. And I had a great time, but it was like 2 weeks later when I looked at the photographs that I had taken of the exhibit. It's like, oh my God, these are too cool to not share. So I began both sharing almost daily on Facebook my images, but I also began carrying my cameras with me religiously in the car and on my person. I can't go for a walk without having one camera on me. And it's almost like another sense that I was ignoring that got turned on. But I kind of just look around almost all the time as if I'm not looking for pictures. I'm just looking. I'm more interested in everything now. I just look differently, and everything has the potential of being a photograph.
Thanks. And if you want, you can go ahead and put up your contact information for anybody who wants to reach out to you, ask you questions, maybe that don't get asked during this presentation, or want to inquire about, some of these products, your Rumi book with photographs, your cards that have images, or who just might want to print. So thank you very much for putting that up.
Sure.
All right. Go ahead. Any other questions for Mike? And also, if you'd like Mike to go back to a slide, he can go back to a slide as well.
Mike, this is Alexi. You definitely have an artist's eye in many respects, and it's really interesting how I actually do some songwriting and photography, and when I'm in the songwriting mode, everything is a song, and when I'm in a photography mode, everything is a picture. And I think that's true for poets and story writers and anything. When you really start honing in to one specific aspect of your creativity, all of a sudden it starts blossoming. And I can see that's really happened in your photography, and from one photographer to another. Very nice job.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else?
Mercedes
Marco.
here.
Oh, sorry, Mercedes. Go ahead.
Okay, Mike, I just want to tell you, I love your work. I love the way you really look at the world and observe it and see the little things, which I think are actually quite important to me anyway. They're what helps me get through the day. And I thank you so much for sharing this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed
very much.
All right, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah. It's Marco, Mike. Thank you very much again for sharing these beautiful, beautiful photos with us. And I really loved, I'm mesmerized almost by the way you play and use this texture and the shapes of objects. It's really fantastic. And for me, really the trademark of great artists is how they are able to convey and elicit moods and feelings. And you are a master in this. Kudos, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. I really appreciate that. Yeah, for me, my fine art photography is like almost like the opposite of my commercial art. It's anti corporate. I just shoot for me, just for the fun of it. I don't stage stuff. I just walk around with alert eyes.
It really shows, in your photos.
Thank you.
Like the moment that you catch that is superb, really.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for a couple of more questions. Well, Mike, do you have any final thoughts before we head out?
Oh, just I don't have a website for my fine art photography, but if somebody was interested in buying a photograph, I could do like what I did with you, Waverly, at Christmas time, is I could send a fairly large PDF where my includes a lot of images and a little code. I can work with different size budgets and stuff if people wanted to buy photographs. Also, in this Walking with Rumi book, a lot of my photographs are in there. There's at least, I think 120 of my photographs paired with 100 of Rumi's poems and 70 of his quotes. That's a nice buy. And I also have these blank cards. It's a set of 8. They're mostly flower. They're my favorite nature photos. And yeah, so reach out to me either by phone, text, or email. I'd be happy to talk to you and see what we might be able to do together.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. This has been absolutely wonderful. I echo everybody else's compliments and sentiments towards you. This has been educational, but also a really aesthetic experience. It's beautiful photography that we've all been enriched by this morning. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing more of your upcoming art as well. So thanks, Michael.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.